Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mark White. Mike, how's it going? Thank you. We always like to start our fireside chat on a personal note. So if you can talk about your upbringing, so where were you born, where you raised, perhaps talk about your first entrepreneurial experience as a child.
So in my case, I grew up south of Atlanta, Georgia. The more tired I am, the more southern I sound. So as we wear on tonight, it might get there. I literally grew up at the dinner table talking about accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory, sales cycles, et cetera, in a wholesale merchandising business. So grew up, went to college, thought for sure that's what I was going to do. I was going to go be the CIO at May & Company. Actually, was the data processing manager at that point. That was the apex position. I was going to be the IT guy at May & Company, and then my family sold the corporation, and I had to go get a real job. So graduated University of Georgia, and I heard somebody dissing on Georgia when I was back there. Are you South Carolina?
I graduated from UGA.
Oh, from UGA, so you weren't dissing, that's good. All right. I was afraid it might have been the brick technical school down on North Avenue, so thank you. Went to University of Georgia, undergraduate in computer science. So Georgia, not being Georgia Tech, the computer science was a systems architecture, systems engineering degree, not computer engineering. And then a graduate degree in operations research. So I use my undergraduate literally every day of my career. I have never once in 29 years used my graduate degree. My master's thesis was, who knows now, let's see. It was multi-point optimization in nonlinear spaces. So computer methods for multi-point optimization in nonlinear spaces. Hey, this was when it was 3274 color terminals were the pinnacle of the art. All right, so I want you to know it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. So right out of graduate school, got married, bought a house, got a job in that order, which is kind of scary, and started with Arthur Andersen Consulting Division. I was like employee number 100 or 120 in the Atlanta office for then. Did that, it became Andersen Consulting. I went back to Arthur Andersen, something called Business Consulting, which was the emerging markets technology consulting. Did that for a number of years, made partner with the firm, was ultimately 14 years with Andersen. At the last couple of years, I ran the advanced technology practice for the US. I actually ran it. I filled in the advanced tech practice for global for about 6 months because, let's see, how was I? I was very young. Anyway, I was young enough to think I could do it, and then old enough to discover that I needed to go help find somebody that really could do it, which was ironic because Tom, we brought a guy in to do it, and a few years later, Tom was in town, and I said, let's go get breakfast. I want to talk with you. And I was going to get breakfast with him to tell him I was leaving Andersen, because a client of mine was .comming. Now, the dates of these things matter a lot. In 1998, it seemed like a great idea, okay? And so the irony is, he said, well, that's funny, I wanted to have breakfast with you because I'm leaving the firm. Now, he was going to go be a general partner with Venrock Ventures, the Rockefeller Ventures group, right? But the extra cool thing is he led all 3 rounds for us. Yeah, that was really good. That was really good. So went .comming. And it was still called .comming at that point. And we raised $40 million in 3 rounds.
This is for Realium?
This was Realium, real estate for the new millennium. Okay. Core integrated managed apps, services, all the back office for running apartment real estate investment trusts. So it is exactly as excited as you feel too. And so the funny part about that was, so we started with a project. I was an engagement partner on a project, Avalon Bay. You guys know Avalon Bay? They're big apartment real estate up here. You see Avalon Bay communities around. Great firm. And the CFO was a client of the firm. He said, come up and help us replace our core back office software. So the then current state of the art was called RentRoll 2000 for DOS. Thank you. So the interesting thing is some of you have no idea what that means, but it meant it was for a really crappy platform, okay? So that was state of the art. And these guys were like number 7, the 7th largest real estate REIT in the US. And so the CFO said, so what would it take for me to build a custom solution, more accurately, for you to build me a custom solution? And I gave him the, several tens of millions of dollars, many, many years, and you don't want to do it because you're a great real estate company, not a great software company. Okay. I go home, back to Atlanta, and he calls me up a month later. He says, let's do it. I said, let's do what? And he said, let's build a software. Yeah. I'm like, Tom, you don't understand. It was, X million dollars, 3 years. He goes, oh, no, let's do it. I'm like, oh, okay. Remember, I'm a partner with a consulting firm, so I'm obliged. And so we did that, and then about 18 months into it, remember, this was late 1989, late 1999, 98, 99, that's what it is, late 98, early 99. So he said, let's spin it out into a .com. And I was like, yeah. And so we did. And we did. We raised 3 rounds. And if you guys are raising venture money, let's talk about that, right? Because I'm not exactly sure what I would do right, but I'm sure as hell know what I wouldn't do again. So we can talk about some of those things. Did that for 4 years. Not quite 4 years, I guess. We did a vertical roll-up, because remember, 2001 was a bad economy because of 9/11. 2002 was really crappy. So in 2003, we rolled up. We were not at the pinnacle of the roll-up. Relium was not. So I was the surplus executive. Surplus executive. That means I had to go find a job, and because I filed for my options. Again, there's a lot. If you go venture funding, let's talk about things like preferred stock as opposed to common stock. Let's talk about things like dilution, right? Because when I got done, I had to go back to work for a living. And so interestingly, I had gotten out of Anderson. You guys know the Enron meltdown. So Arthur Anderson melted down based on the Enron issues. Department of Justice came around a few years later and said, oops, but it was a little late then. But I had gotten out before that. And as a guy who got out of a partnership and got my capital out before the meltdown, when it came time to look for another job, and ultimately Deloitte, I was pretty careful before I signed a capital check to become a principal of the firm again. But did that, and it's been fantastic. They wrote the business case for me to join the firm as a software architect and CIO advisory, CIO strategy, software architecture. Yeah. And a month into it, they said, hey, the guy who was running the technology infrastructure, compute, storage, network, ops, running that service line just sold a big gig. Can you come do this for us? And so I did that. I ran the architecture and infrastructure practice for 5 years, and then had the opportunity to be the US CTO for 4 years, and then starting just this past year, became the global CTO.
Okay, let me, I got to be very selective with my questions here. Okay. No, we like it. We like your answer. From Relium, from your start, $40 million, and then going into an executive role, CTO. So let's talk about that. Like, what did you learn from the startup, and how did you apply that to sort of your role as CTO? I mean, is there a difference between being a founder and being an executive? Well, let's talk about what are some of the skills that you learned?
Well, I get paid regularly on this one, which my wife considers a real plus. I was a partner at Anderson for like 4 years before I went .comming, and so I thought I was pretty big time, right? Yep. And got into this and started the money raise, and learned that I didn't tell the story the right way. I told the story like an engineer would tell the story, and you need to learn to tell the story like a business person tells the story. Then we got the money, and I got a board of directors, and I learned that I didn't understand what it was to work a board of directors, because there's a specific set of things you should, in fact, must do to work with your board of directors in order to be successful with them, for them to be successful with you. So those are things that I was pretty successful in the consulting business, right? Partner, blah, 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 and had never had to learn that, right? Yeah. Now, I take that and I come into being a partner with Deloitte, and I fancy it. Some of my colleagues are here, so I guess they can tell you the truth after all is said and done, but I think that has stood me in good stead, particularly this realization that I talked and thought and worked like an engineer, which is okay, but I needed to sell and convince and advocate like a business person.
Now let's talk about the Deloitte story.
So those normal days look like an opportunity to talk with a client who has an opportunity or a problem, to bring the things we know how to do to bear, the things we've done to bear, convince them that we're the ones to do it, find a vehicle. If you guys, anybody do federal work? Yeah, find a vehicle, right? Get the contracts officer on board, blah, blah, blah. So literally, the helping a client and sell them what we do and then help lead the delivery. Now, I mean, honest, right? There's some of my colleagues are here. My day-to-day delivery is pretty, I don't do a ton of day-to-day delivery. I actually created a PowerPoint from very scratch. It was like I opened it up, it was blank, I created a whole PowerPoint. It's a shame when PowerPoint's your programming environment, my IDE, but I'm hell on it, it's good. So that's sort of the real day in the life of delivery, right? And you go to the project, it's project-based, so the culture of the firm is, the most atomic element of the culture of the firm is the project team and the project-based delivery, et cetera. The other half is this idea of the chief technology officer. Now, I have to admit, let me be honest with you, we have a real CTO. His name is Jerome Oglesby, and he keeps all of the systems of the firm running like clockwork, right? And I wouldn't have his job for I'd do it for $10 million and a 3-year contract, right? So what a tough job, and he does a fabulous. My job, CTO, is actually market-facing, and it's about innovation and imminence. Yeah. So what do we think we need to be able to do in the marketplace in 18 to 36 months? And then as we bring that on board, how do we let the clients know that that's in fact possible and practical and valuable? And so I'm sort of an evangelist and innovator evangelist. It's the best job in the firm, right? So the bad news is you don't get to do it forever because these are all roles. The good news is I'm making hay right now. So so that job day over day looks like today. There's three things today. This is the third, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you again for that. I started the day briefing the head of an intelligence client, the chief innovation officer and the chief digital officer of an intelligence client on digital strategy. So we spent 2 hours on digital strategy. It was fabulous, very interesting, right? They have really unique problem sets. And then I spent part of a time at an internal meeting where I delivered a message on technology and technology disruptors and the whole idea of exponential technology. How do you recognize something? Exponential curve, early days looks like a low flat linear, right? So how do you recognize it when it's low fat linear before it flares up? And then this. Okay. So that's a CTO kind of day.
Awesome. And so I know Deloitte, they always issue a report every year called Tech Trends for the year for 2001, 2000. Yeah, a lot of there. My colleagues back there. Yeah.
So how many of you have seen this report? It's a really famous...
You don't have to lie. It's really okay.
Yeah. And so actually, Mark, you probably go around the world to talk about this.
So one of the reasons it was so hard to get me is because we released the report at the end of January, early February. Right. And so I do Europe and Africa in April, May, June.
Got it. Okay.
So that's a busy time.
Sure.
This is the slow season.
Okay, slow season. Got it. So basically, this report is released every year, and you get feedback from client executives, academics, industry analysts, and crowdsource ideas from your global networks of clients. So in this report, you have broken it up into two sections: disruptors and enablers. I want to talk about more the disruptor side of things because I think this sort of relates to startups here. So you have probably like 5 points here. So the number one point you had said, or this report had said, CIOs have to act like venture capitalists. So can you explain that? Like, what does it mean when CIOs need to act more like venture capitalists when approaching their sort of like IT portfolio?
Yep. Okay, so if you're interested, you can Google Deloitte Tech Trends 2014, and it will take you to the site, and you can get the PDF or you can get the app. And the app this year, we did a little differently on the app this year. So in portrait mode, it gives you an abstract and view into the text of the app. And in landscape mode, it's a mashup with the video and a poll and the infographic and some other stuff. So if you're interested, and you can also just get the PDF. It is, if we do industry versions, and the public sector version, my team is here for that. And that is 192 pages this year, which is 11 chapters. So the good news is it's only like 15 pages a chapter. So when we do the trends, every global systems integrator has trends. You're obliged to do that. We distinguish ours, we hope, with 3 particular rules. So the rules are, to be a trend, it must be business-led, technology-enabled. So it's not technology for technology's sake, and that actually is endemic. So that is a signature of Deloitte. Accenture, for example, are a technology firm that solve business problems. We're a business consulting, we'll see, with a huge technology capability, right? Distinction. IBM, you might characterize as a phenomenal technology product and brain trust that solves business problems, right? So business-led, technology-enabled. We write these things to time horizon 2, so I expect the trends to actually be generally manifest, to be generally rolling out into the large enterprise marketplace in time horizon 2, 18 to 24 months. And then the third rule is the hard one for me. The team won't let me write a trend if we can't find at least 3 general market companies adopting along the path of the trend. Now that doesn't mean I get 3 mature adoptions. That would counterindicate an 18 to 24 months, but on the path, dot-to-dot path of the trend. So that's the rule set. Yeah. We divide them, and it turns out we divide them fairly arbitrarily into disruptors and enablers. Yeah. The idea is that disruptors are things that the CIO might not have spent any time on before, while the enablers may be things on which they've spent time and money in the past, and we want them particularly to take another look because we believe something has changed, right? So we talked this year in the enabler side about in-memory revolution, the whole technologists. How many of you are technologists? Okay, finance, operations, HR.
Here to eat pizza.
Here to eat pizza? Yeah, okay. All right, so I won't get too geeky about it, and if I do, you guys pull me in. But the whole point of for example, in-memory revolution is we've done it before. It's not new, but there's something new that makes it worth looking at this year. So to your point, yeah. We always talk, there's always a trend, at least the 5 years we've published this externally, there's always been a trend on the role of the CIO. And this year we write about the idea of CIO as venture capitalists. Now, are any of you using VCs? Round 1, Series A? Series?
More like an angel.
Angel, okay, very early stage. All right, but before you go any further, let's talk. So when you think about venture capitalists and you think about CIOs, if you've grown up, if you've grown up and you've sort of dealt with large enterprise CIOs, you go, it'd be hard to find sort of more different personae, more different profiles, right? A CIO by design is risk avoidance, risk aversion. A venture capitalist by design is risk intelligent, risk seeking. A CIO by design has a minimum portfolio footprint to reduce complexity and cost. A venture capitalist by design has a maximal portfolio footprint, right? With a risk profile that should be graduated or gradated across. The CIO has people in her or his team that are expert in the delivery of the existing capabilities. The venture capitalist has experts in her or his team that are experts in the next horizon of, in my world, technologies. It could be medicine, it could be mechanicals, right? So how different? And we're saying that in order to continue to be successful at driving rapid adoption of digital technologies into their enterprises, that's the underlying premise, right? That the CIO needs to take a page from this venture capitalist. And they need to, A, have a portfolio. A lot of CIOs don't have a portfolio, they just have a list of systems they run. Yeah. All right? You need to have a portfolio. That portfolio needs to have some bias, some spread across risk. Okay, so this is where everybody, their hair catches on fire, because I say, you're going to make investments that fail, right? By the way, public sector CIOs, their hair catch on fire and they fall on the ground, right? So because, why in God's name? 80% of the money I have is keeping the lights on. Only 20% is new improvements and enhancements and innovation. And you want me to take some of that 20% and put it at risk, right? How crazy is that? So we have to get them through that. But once you do, what you find is that they actually are achieving much greater traction in leading their organizations forward into the future. Okay, so what's the good of doing this? The good of doing this is that you as the CIO are actually voting with your pocketbook. You're actually managing a portfolio with a risk profile that is exposed. And you're saying to your people, this is important, right? Real examples?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask about that with, from a perspective of startups trying to sell to CIOs. With that perspective, being a venture capitalist, what are sort of the things that a startup need to keep in mind when we're pitching a Mark White.
Yeah, so this is a really complicated, as Mark and I were having this conversation, this is a really complicated discussion because it all depends. By the way, if you're in consulting, right, it depends, right? Okay, so let me give you two examples that are actually quite different. The CIO of the state of Michigan, yes, a state public sector CIO, right? And he actually stood up and went and had to get the legislature to write legislation to fund an evergreen venture investment capability for the office of the CIO in the state of Michigan. Now, it's only $2 million. I know, that sounds ridiculous. You say only and 2 million in the same phrase. But, you know, it's only $2 million a year. But he evergreens it because he doesn't have to make money. He's public sector. So all he wants to do is the bets he places make enough money to renew the fund, right? That's the idea. He's actually doing better than that. He's doing very early stage, and he's doing very early stage for venture opportunities in the state of Michigan, right? That's practical. Contrast that. So I was in a meeting with the CIO of New York Life, slightly larger company, right? And he has a $20 million venture fund. He's positioning in sort of mid to late stage, not really late, mid to late mid stage. So there's viable product, but not necessarily at scale, not necessarily profitable, maybe cash flowing, right?
Is this funds for startups though?
This is funds for startups. So he's picking startups that are in sort of mid stage, right? And he's funding them, but he's also actually bringing their product or solution into some part of the New York Life portfolio. Okay. So these startups are not only getting some money, always good, right? But they're getting an opportunity to deploy into New York Life, okay, right? And so he's sort of voting with his feet. Now, he's big enough, and they're sort of the gravitas of New York Life is high enough that what he's doing, the places he's putting his bets, actually is influential on the rest of the insurance marketplace, right? So the venture companies get sort of the double bang on that.
But so how can we as startups find out about these funds? Like, you know, you talked about this.
So you can Google, if you Google it, you just find it.
Okay, that's a good start.
Yeah.
But I mean, so like these large corporations, I mean, like what's the percentage of them that have funds set aside for?
Almost all of them have something.
Okay,
almost
so
almost all of them have something. The question is, are you going to get them to behave as though it were a venture fund, or community reinvestment or some other thing, right? Okay. Grant-based funding is, which actually grant-based funding is not a bad thing, right? Because if you write the grant application, you succeed the grant application, you collect the money, and you're done with that part of it, right? Which is good. But so if you have a product or a solution or an offering or a service, and I would distinguish, you know, a little bit of a spectrum there, a product or an offering or a solution or a service that's relevant to the persona of the CIO of some industry, and is almost always going to be industry contains sector contains company, right? And so your product, your offering, your solution, or your service is almost always going to be relevant based on the particular industry sector company.
Okay.
That make sense? So the domaining of your relevance is almost always in the industry space. It can be functional. All CFOs, no matter the company type, right? Right.
Okay.
And consumer offerings feel a little different than that, and sure, you can tell I'm mostly on the large enterprise side, but we can talk about that. So you should figure out where you are, right? Figure out what your value prop is, who the persona is, whose problem you're solving or opportunity you're creating, and then decide what the message looks like.
So actually, with the value proposition for startups, like how, I didn't want to beat the dead horse here, but like when they're approaching CIOs, can they approach it, you know, with the cost reduction, so you know, cost savings approach, or generating more leads or generating more revenue streams? Like what do you think is a better approach for a value proposition for a startup?
You know what the answer is?
What?
It depends.
Okay.
Yeah. Why not both?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you can do both. So here's the deal. You ultimately are with an individual buyer, right? Or at least a small group. So I would have said, by the way, my inclination is always to say the upside case. Go sell the upside. You know, I'm going to increase your business. I'm going to increase your marketplace. I'm going to increase your blah, 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 right? As opposed to selling the below the line case, which is I'm going to decrease your cost. I'm going to, you know, increase your efficiency. Yeah. But it turns out that IT cost reduction, IT CR, is just won't die. It's like COBOL, yeah. Right? You just, it's $250 to $300 an hour for COBOL programmers now. I just, you know, for those of you who are trying to make the rent next month, if you got COBOL, you can just do a few hours of that. So, I would almost, my inclination is always to say make the upside. Okay. But there are certain things, you know, this sounds so cheesy, but what keeps them up at night? And you know why it sounds cheesy? Because it is cheesy. So you should never actually ask that question. That's just a little too naive, right? A little too cliched. Yeah. But that's the thing, you know, really, what is keeping her up at night? I mean, you know, why is she, you know, shower anxiety? You know, you're getting ready in the morning, you're having a shower, and suddenly you have that panic attack because, you know, you realize the meeting is only 5 minutes from now, or you realize there was something, I mean, whatever that, you know, what's keeping them up at night? Yeah. That may be upside, that may be competitive advantage, that may be marketplace, market making. It may be, I have to find 10% or lose people, right? Okay. And so if your product, offering, solution, or service can serve either way, sure. Choose.
How many startups here are enterprise, or selling to enterprise? Okay. How about selling to consumers? Okay, got it.
And the rest of you don't know? Is that? Because that's a good place to start, yeah.
There are small businesses.
Right. So in the report, I wanted to move to like other concepts of the report. You had talked about, or the report talks about cognitive analytics, which is basically, you know, AI, machine learning, NLP. I'm particularly interested in that. So I wanted to, that's one of the benefits of an interview. I can ask questions.
That's right.
So I wanted to, just recently actually, you heard about that company that beat the Turing test. So the Turing test is basically a test where a person will go in there and they'll have a conversation. They don't know if it's a real person on the other side or whether it's a machine. So for the first time, this company had beat the Turing test. So 30% of the folks on the other humans thought that it was a real person. But it was kind of a little cheating because they said, I'm a 13-year-old boy, right? It's like, well... I mean,
a little naive,
yeah,
right?
A little naive, right?
Right.
So with that said, it seems like this whole cognitive analytics is, you know, going to the forefront. So in the report, you had talked about that it will move into healthcare, it will disrupt healthcare, financial services, supply chain, CRM, telecommunications, cybersecurity. So could you kind of give us examples of this cognitive analytics and how it applies to this? Just give us some examples.
Okay, so cognitive, you guys know what analytics is? Analytics, so you laugh, but it's important to have a definition, right? I have transactional systems. Transactional systems automate what I need to do, business process automation. Analytical systems automate what I need to know and decide, right? Business decision automation. So analytical solutions. Cognitive analytics is what we're saying is in the next 18 to 24 months, we will see a significant adoption of cognitive analytics in the general large business marketplace. Cognitive is Watson.
Watson, right?
Right? So IBM Watson, everybody's seen it. If you haven't seen the documentary that Boston Public TV did, they did a documentary on teaching Watson to win at Jeopardy. And it's fabulous. It's very interesting sort of regardless, but it shows you some of the strengths and weaknesses of AI machine learning in this highly supervised learning mode that they have for Watson right now. Okay, so everybody's heard of Watson? Anybody heard of Eliza? Okay, so that's, if you have a little, oh no, you young guys over there with Eliza. Okay, so Eliza was this Bell Labs, AT&T Bell Labs thing that was a early toss at Turing tests. And so you would type things like, you know, hello Eliza, and they would respond, and it was pseudo-conversational, So Eliza's way over here, right? Watson is here. You guys know what Jarvis is? Iron Man?
Yeah.
Jarvis?
Yeah,
Iron Man. Yeah, okay. So that's the next generation. Now, it's still science fiction. I mean, it really is only in the movies. I'm sorry, but it is. And he doesn't look that good in real life either. I've seen him. But that's where we're headed, because what Watson does is if you present an hypothesis and supervise the learning into the hypothesis domain, Watson will bring back candidate solutions to your hypothesis with a transparent probability. So why it thinks this is the solution, what level the solution is, okay? All right. What Jarvis represents is the ability to go beyond serving an articulate hypothesis to generating potential hypotheses. So Jarvis would actually think outside the box. He would ask questions unprompted based on the circumstances and solution, right? So that's where we're headed, and it's not that far. Okay, now here's the question you asked.
So let's start with healthcare. What would
a healthcare payer. So this is a healthcare insurer, right? And they have a call center with 3,000 healthcare professionals in it, mostly RN and LPN. So 3,000 healthcare professionals in a call center answering calls all day, every day. And it's the calls when you and I call in and say, hey, my doctor's prescribed this, but it's not on your formulary. Will you cover it, or do you have a, an alternative, right? Or you call in and you say, my doctor's recommended I have this procedure. Would you cover it? All the pre-authorization. Do you guys do that? You guys have insurance? That's good.
We're startups, so maybe
you should. You should. You have to now. Don't. Yeah. Everybody should nod. Right? I'm not with the IRS. They would get these calls day in, day out, 3,000 people. Average handling time of the call, 20 minutes. Holy cow, right? And so the other thing would be is that Nurse Mark would answer your call and give you a recommendation or an answer, and you, Nurse Brian, would answer the call. And we're both trying to apply the same body of knowledge, the same formulary, the same process constraints and governance, right? But just humans are different, right? All right, so a Watson-based solution went in, implements the entire body of knowledge totally transparently, went from 20 minutes to sub 2 seconds, completely uniform, completely transparent, right? So you would expect the 3,000 people in the call center to go down to some much smaller number, the 20-minute average handling time to go down to, close to nothing. And it turns out it didn't. Now, they got about a 20%. By the way, 20% of 3,000 is not terrible, right? But 20% savings. But it turns out that when you call in and you say, can I have this medicine? You do not want to hear, no. Right? In fact, you don't even want to hear, yes. Right? What you want to hear is a human. And so the issue with adoption in some of these things, particularly in driving decision and action outcomes, is less the technology. The technologies have come out of the lab. They've come out of the defense industrial complex. They're in commercial business today, available and accessible in many open source implementations for small business to take advantage of this transformation from business process automation to business decision automation, right? It's still a human factor. There's still human factors involved.
Okay. All right. I mean, just trying to go through a lot of these concepts because there's a lot I want to cover. But it seems like the value proposition for cognitive analytics is reducing, say, 72 hours into real time, right? To make those kind of decisions. Okay, well, I mean, we'll talk more.
You can win at Jeopardy.
Yeah, you can win at Jeopardy's, right? But the next concept I want to talk about is this whole industrialized crowdsourcing. Oh yeah. Yeah, this was in the report. Yeah. And in the report, you guys had mentioned that companies use collective knowledge to. There was some examples in there where they would use TaskRabbit. Like Walmart will use TaskRabbit to do inventory control, right?
You actually read this report. That's good.
Did,
That's
right,
good.
Right. Yeah. I actually had to take a couple of Red Bull. But for the good of the interview. So the thing is that Walmart would use TaskRabbit to see if indeed that the product is on the shelf, right? So that was one. The one thing that I really liked was this Quirky. Anybody heard of Quirky from New York? So they're basically a crowdsourced platform for consumer electronics. They're sort of like a Reddit, right? So you can vote up certain products. They'll look at that and you can vote on whatever product tweets you want. It's an upcoming startup in New York. They actually sold 121 products on that platform, 2.3 million units. And so GE, so I'm just kind of regurgitating in the report. Yep. GE had set up a partnership with Quirky, and they basically opened up their whole library of patents to now give it to the public, where now the public can take these unutilized patents and sort of use it. So do you think there's, and then I did a little bit more research and I said, okay, what are the top 10 patent holders in the world? And there's Samsung, IBM, Canon, Sony, LG, Microsoft, Toshiba, Panasonic. Do you think there's going to be a paradigm shift to sort of this crowdsourcing?
So, good question, right? Good question. Briefly, I think cognitive analytics is probably on the longer, in terms of general market adoption, sort of further out. I think industrialized crowdsourcing is one of the closest in. And actually one of the greatest, we can talk about this. If I were going to start a business, if we're going to start a venture now, what would I do? Okay, so we can come back to that. But so what Quirky did essentially was say, we can do very high speed, very high accuracy product design and development, right? So they literally were designing the product features and functions, the next gen products online, crowdsourcing the design, right? And when they reach a critical mass of essentially consensus and interest, then they would turn the product. By the way, at which point you've already generated, I mean, it's fabulous, right? It's fabulous. And so GE said, you know what, we have a whole lot of intellectual property that's probably configurable, manufacturable, or assemblable, right? Yeah. Can be assembled. Yeah. And we can let these guys take their wisdom of crowds, their crowdsourcing approach, and apply it to that, and monetize IP that would otherwise just literally be on the shelf because we don't have the time and attention to go and get it configured to market, yeah. Right? So is there opportunity for others to open up their patent libraries for similar ideas? Maybe. Right. Maybe. There are problems that have to do more with international patent defense or patent trolls, which is patent offense, I suppose. The fish guys are back there, are they? So call me down when I say something bad on this. But you know, the patent offense or defense plays, yeah. It's more about not getting into boxing matches on your patents than it is that.
So actually, you know, Tesla, they just opened up their patents. You heard about that, right?
Yeah.
And now they're making for the good, if it's goodwill to make better products, they'll actually give their patents out license free. So it's sort of like open source. They open source their.
So he believes, A, he's got enough money, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, but he worked for it, not for nothing, right? But what he believes is that he will never reach critical mass alone. Okay. So he has now proven a business model of essentially off-the-shelf technology, assembly, integration, orchestration. That, have you guys driven a Tesla S? It's phenomenal, right? It's phenomenal. But your face is pressed back when it's quiet, right? It's amazing. Right. It's amazing. And so, I mean, you love the car, right? I mean, the fact that it's an all-battery car is kind of incidental to the fact that it goes 0 to 60 in about 3.7 seconds. And it's a 200-pound car. I mean, okay, I love cars. So he proved it. He proved a business model. He proved a technical implementation. But he can't generate sufficient scale alone. And so the trick is, right, open source that to allow others to begin to plant other, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. In this case, probably about 200, but right.
Well, let's, on the same vein of like difficult for adoption, let's talk about wearables. So
I'm so sorry. I left it. My guys already beat me up. I left my Google Glass and my smartwatch 2 and the other stuff in the car. Right. We can go and get it, but it's not that clever. So
sure. You're actually. So I Googled you, and you actually had an opinion about wearables, and I quote you. You said use cases that are compelling for those wearables don't come from the living room, like iPhone did, not from the boardroom like the tablet. They are from the factory floor and industrial environments. So find a deskless worker in your organization. So, I mean. Okay, so let's talk about that, right? Yeah, like what, you guys, wearables, right? Okay, so 2 broad sets of use cases that we're seeing. One is in the medical device and quantified self. You guys have a Fitbit or a Fuel Band, right? There's medical device versions of the same thing, so that it'll do vitals. Not only will it monitor, but it will administer medicine like insulin pump injection, et cetera, right? So those are wearables, swallowables, so you can swallow the pill. It's a pill cam, right? And they can see inside you all the way. Yeah. So that's a set of use cases whose value is actually quite provable. Now, the implementations themselves are quite specific. They feel like they're coming from medical devices, biomedical space, okay? It's okay. Then what about all the other use cases for wearables? And so what we said was, hey, you know what? I had such fabulous use case and transformation results in the smartphone or in the tablet. Surely I can find in the use cases that are powerful here, powerful use cases to cause adoption, to create positive change in these wearables.
And it turns out, at least so far, it's not true. As you ably quoted, this was a consumerization phenomenon. It came from the living room into the enterprise. Our CIO's named Larry Quinlan. And so at the time he said this, he was US CIO, who's now global CIO. Larry said about 3 or 4 years ago now, I thought for a while CIO meant Chief iPhone Officer. Because every call was, when can I get this app on when can I use the phone, blah, blah, blah. So this was an executive phenomenon. It came from the boardroom. By the way, do you know why this came from the living room, this came from the boardroom? Because the executives can afford to pay $600 instead of $200, and you can read this without your glasses. I'm not kidding, it's actually the reason. It's not, but it turns out that those use cases are not the powerful use cases. Thus, not my disdain, but my current lack of love for the Google Glass. Yeah. Google Glass implements Google Now. Yeah. Fabulous piece of, if you guys use Google Now, right? Fabulous piece of work. Information cards that are totally contextual about you and your history, your time, your place, those around you, what's on your calendar, the Google searches you've done. It's a little creepy, but it brings you the stuff, right? So Google Glass implements the Google Now info cards on essentially a carousel in that rearview mirror looking heads-up display. Nothing I do with Google Glass is not better or more easily, or at least as easily done with my phone or tablet. Right, and it only has a 4-hour battery life. Okay. So how do you find a good use case? And by the way, we think that there are a lot of good use cases. Okay. There's a company called Apex Labs. They're
actually here.
They're here in Greater Washington, right? Yeah. Great company. They build the software platforms for wearables, and they're very focused on visuals now, viewables, goggles. In fact, they came out of the military. They did baseball card in theater kind of stuff, right? So their CTO and I were talking one day, and we were talking about this struggle, like where does it matter? Who's going to care? And it turns out, if you use this formula, first, find a deskless worker whose job is really important to the mission or the business. So someone whose day is not spent at a desk, as mine obviously is, but who's deskless and whose job is really important to the mission. And then do day in the life, week in the life of that deskless worker. And look for the following circumstance. Times when they need heads up, hands-free, see-through. Heads up, hands-free, see-through, context-rich information and transaction for the task at hand. You have a deskless worker, they're moving about the work environment, they have a task at hand. If that task benefits significantly from heads up, see-through, hands-free, context-rich information and or transaction, there's a powerful use case for a wearable. Example. Guys, you know what pick, pack, ship is? I'm in a warehouse, you've ordered something from Amazon. We've all done that, right? It's pretty robotic at Amazon now, but let's pretend it's not. So your order goes in, somebody literally goes and picks the pieces of your order off the shelf out of the pallets, right? Packs that and ships it to you, pick, pack, ship. So one of the interesting issues is, if you're gonna go around a warehouse as complex as Amazon's, where you put the stuff when it comes in on the receiving dock is best done in random arrival fashion. But then it's a real bear for your pickers to go find the right stuff, which means you have to print a pick list in advance, which means it's static. Yeah. Okay, now the guy has on a wearable, right? And literally the wearable app is optimizing his path for the pick dynamically. So I know you've probably never done this, but I've done it before. You hit order on Amazon, and then about 5 minutes later you go, I didn't need 5 of them, and you go back and you take 3 of them off, right? And it lets you do that. Well, they actually could be picking that already, and they have to unpick those subsequently. So we can do that dynamically. Okay, now the guy's also wearing a lift belt. You know the lifting belts like you're supposed to wear, so you lift with your legs, not with your back. And the lifting belt is also instrumented, and so when he bends over to do an inappropriate lift, he gets a yellow warning, inappropriate lift posture, right? To help him not get hurt.
Should do that for golfing.
And give a little bit of positive, negative feedback. Then so if you're doing it wrong, you get a
Exactly.
So that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Wearables that are actually optimizing my day-to-day work, that are actually making me safer, right? Now here's where it gets creepy. So by the way, if I've warned him that it's a dangerous lift and he does it anyway, I don't have to pay his workers' comp. Oh, the man, right? So We have to be. It is actually. We have to be slightly careful with that stuff. But the use cases are out there. The devices are going forward very quickly. Okay.
Okay. We're running out of time, so we want to open up for Q&A. But there's going to be 2 more questions here. So before I open up for Q&A, one question is, what is the most important piece of advice to give it to entrepreneurs selling to CIOs, CTOs?
So if you're actually
$1 billion corporations.
Of large corporations, right? If you're actually going to sell or going to take your idea, your venture directly to, right? Then make sure you are domain relevant. Make sure, so that domain could be industry sector, company operations domain. So you are relevant to wireline, regional wireline telcos. You are relevant to industrial product manufacturers in Western Europe. I mean, whatever the domain relevance is, you're relevant to the business problems or opportunities. Remember, that relevance can be horizontal. It can be you are relevant to the finance function. You are relevant to the talent performance function, right? So it can be in horizontal. But first, get domain and get domain relevant. Okay. Second, and I'm sure I'm sort of overly sensitive to this, but I sold like an engineer. Here's what we are going to do and how we are going to do it, which is fascinating, and I'm going to tell you in great detail. And then by the time, if I have any time left, I'll tell you why it's important to you. But you will know what I'm going to do, and you know exactly how I'm going to do it, because that's the cool part of it, right? You know what that guy sitting on the other side is going, you know, and if they're a venture, by the way, if you're pitching the VC, you're way bad. That's way bad, right? So what you've got to say is, here's why you should care and how it's going to change your life existence, problem, or opportunity. And then, by the way, what we are going to do together to solve that. Now, remember, product offering solution service, right? If you're in a service or service wrapped, right, that's really important. That's really important. Because their buy is a multi-part buy. Nonetheless, I would say, particularly in early stage, you ought to be domain relevant, be it vertical or horizontal, and you ought to start with why you should care, how it will change your life, solve your problems, and what we are going to do together to make it happen.
Okay, great. We're going to open up to Q&A. Well, first of all, how many VIPs or City Pass members do we have? Like, raise your hand. Okay, all right, great. So we'll just go here. Here we go.
Question is, being in the federal space for a long time and knowing what the acquisition sector is like, how can we enable sort of these public-private partnerships so that your guy at Michigan could get access to Dan Gilbert at Detroit Venture Partners, or the NSFI Corps or DARPA could get access to Corky?
If you think about what InQtel does, they are mid-stage to late stage placement investors in exactly the same way, right? What they, I think, fail to do, and we've talked with Dr. Heinemann and some of the other guys about that, they fail to actually shop it in the marketplace more broadly.
Hi, thank you for speaking with us today. I'm here on behalf of Center for Democracy and Technology. We're a think tank and advocacy group working kind of in the internet domain. Thanks, Brian. Essentially, I wanted to ask, from the perspective of a VC, what can startups do that are beneficial kind of policy practices that they could take on? Policy practices, I mean IP, what kind of encryption can they use at the beginning stages? What kind of security standards can they advocate? That when they come to you, they look good, they look like a good investment.
Sounds like a pretty loaded question.
Can you give an example of a successful venture that came to you and you looked at it and you said, well, it was successful because of good security standards at an early stage?
We bought a company called Banyan Branch, and we rolled them into our Deloitte Digital business. And they were a social marketing and branding firm. So they would build and manifest, run, and harvest campaigns through the social sphere for branding, advertising, and marketing purposes, right? And they actually have this tremendous piece of IP with regards to process and the implementation of the process on how to make that not just spray and pray, spend and hope, right, but campaign and harvest. So I can actually become highly correlated and actually, in many cases, causal. I can change the meme in the social net. I literally intentionally change the meme in the social network, right? So their protections around their IP, because it's actually easy to describe and hard to do. This is the perfect IP, right? It's easy to describe and understand, but really quite hard to execute. How do you get the original shapeable message? How do you identify the tier 1 network, blah, blah, right? So that was actually a value proposition. We were talking with another company, and they have a very interesting business model. So they are essentially, they're red hatting other open source, right? But that's a poor description, because what they're doing is they're saying to enterprise CIOs, we're going to go through and we're going to inventory this open source solution, platform, tool, software, app. We're going to keep on top of the release patch code. We're going to give you a clear view of the differences in the open source license types. We're going to help you, and literally sort of demystify the use of open source in the large enterprise IT environment. Right? What a great, now, that is an information intensive, and that's really all they have is information, right, and this portal stuff. And it didn't require a lot of protection, because other than just general copyright protection for their content, and license protection for the use. So it can go either way, right? You look, however, and this is important, I'll be done?
Yeah.
Okay, this is important. I really emphasize information technology because of my background, right? If you look at the work we're doing with Singularity University right now, they've identified 6 technologies and 6 methods and processes they believe that are truly exponentially disruptive, right? That's their assertion. That of those 6 technologies, 2.5 are information technology. The remaining are material science, mechanical engineering, and medical, right? And so some of this stuff we look at, so if we go and look at what the pharmas are doing, the protection of the molecule design, the IP protection there is unbelievable. If I go and I look at this issue of physical digital mediation, so 3D printing, right? Mattel makes Barbie. I know with guys, and I only have 3 boys, so I really don't know this, but I'm told. They make Transformers. Well, so the thing about Barbie is that they don't make that much on the Barbie. They make a bunch on Barbie accessories. That's where the money is the Barbie accessories. And so what happens when some young woman sits down and 3D designs a new Barbie hat and throws it out in open source, and you can print it on demand for, $3.50. I mean, it's not that cheap, right? But now Mattel doesn't sell a, $7 Barbie hat, right? More than that, to whom does that IP belong? Well, she can't call it Barbie hat, because we know there's copyright IP on that. But there's some really sophisticated things going on now around the digital physical mediation issues. What MIT Media Lab calls digital physical mediation. So that's a very interesting place to be. Okay. Right, not just IT.
So we don't have any more time because they're running out on the video. So one last question, and we always ask question we always ask our speakers, and it's probably one of the most important. Is you ready?
Yeah.
So who's your favorite superhero and why?
Okay, so I can't believe I'm going to answer this question. As a kid, I was torn between Silver Surfer and Green Lantern, because Green Lantern had this cool looking stuff, but Silver Surfer was really powerful and very enigmatic, right? So I guess I would say Silver Surfer. Now, that actually has become, those are like popular again, right? Because they were on the Avengers and all of that, but anyway, Silver Surfer. He was enigmatic and very powerful.
Sure.
And this cool surfboard.
So usually I get like lead time on this. You told me the answer yesterday. Luckily I found Silver Surfer, Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, Start Brunch Swag. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, hard play.